nostalgic Feferity Radio, Feferity Radio, nostalgic music and sound.
If you believe in yourself, you'll know the real you. It's coming from within. Sin in your mind. Sin in your mind. You subject yourself to being vulnerable. Not knowing why you fall in love. And so you become what you are made to become. It's not at all fair that I feel as I do. Tell me something to make me feel better.
My sister, I am your mind. Within you is a never-ending magnitude of infinite strength, wisdom, and will. You travel my roads through life never knowing your own true reality because my thoughts remain like distant quasars.
Something to make me feel better.
You abuse me, never letting me say and do as I feel. Our thoughts split from love affairs to choice of friends. We argue like two enemies, yet we are good friends. Now there are moments when we harmonize with each other and become one with nature and reality. But these times are few, when after you have replenished yourself, the fear of the truth sets in. We split and you start to run again. Running through women, men, jobs, people, and life, looking for the answer when I had it all along. But I smile, because I am your mind. I was your mind yesterday, I am your mind today, and I'll be your mind tomorrow. And as our end draws near, we will become closer. But you and I, we will never be one. For I will part from you, and you will part from me. You finding another mind, and I another soul. And we'll travel on and on. By the way, I need more than sex to nourish my equilibrium. But I do need sex. I also need sun, trees, stars, creativity, and love. But you saturate my soul with too much of one and not enough of the other. Therefore I cry. But why do we cry? Because tears cleanse the windows of our minds. I am your mind.
Tell me something to make me feel better.
All your thoughts inside your mind, wanting to be free. Well, now you've got the chance to let your mind grow and be free. Because the music is just trying to say things to free your mind. And if you let your mind be free, then you can understand mine. There's no need to be afraid of me. I want to be your friend. I'm just trying to give you music from deep, deep, deep within. All of your dreams can become reality. My outreach is full, but you've only been turning me
Welcome back. Feferity Radio, you're listening to What Are You Saying Here on the weekdays between 6 and 9 with Freestyle, speaking to various people from around the world. As you just had a conversation there with Rosemary Laye about the protest and the position of African people here in Britain. Also on a regular here on a Tuesday is Kenneth Cuvalay, our social psychiatric nurse, specialised in psychiatric. Also is a clinical manager for the Mental Health Caribbean. And let's see what we're going to be talking about today. Like I said, because the way I'm feeling today, I'm not all there because I've been working so tirelessly behind the scene in the studio. But Kenneth is on the line, and I want to welcome him here on Feferity Radio. Welcome, Mr. Kenneth.
Yeah, good evening, brother Freestyle. Thank you again for having us come together to contribute to the broader community, the African community in the UK in particular and around the world, and the broader community in general, where we go into issues which affects our life every day and been affecting our lives for so long as a people with the, on this planet throughout the diaspora and the motherland where our ancestors originated from. So it's a pleasure to be here, and with that I would like to greet the community at large and in the UK and those who are listening around the world. I also would like to take the opportunity, if you permit me to do that.
Please go ahead.
On June the 30th of this year, one of our great historian was killed in Guyana, and his name was Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney played a very important role in liberating Guyana from the British colonial masters at the time. And he also wrote a very interesting book, which I call Educational Instrument. And that book was is titled How Europe Actually Underdeveloped Africa, which is very interesting book to actually address and read and advise our community, African community, to actually try and get hold of such forms of information, because what we are seeing as well is a lot of our prominent leaders and heroes and sheroes, if you may put it that way. A lot of our young people are very much ignorant of the fact of their existence, and I think when that happened, we, like Franz Fanon put it once, a dying colonization. The same way, if we does not protect and actually maintain our history and the knowledge in relation to a lot of those who played a prominent and most important role to actually sustain a better world for us as African on this planet, it would be a tragic thing actually to lose and not have that type of information, education, knowledge shared and transferred to our future young men and women of African, from our African community, so to speak. So, and would like to remind people, like I said, the 13th of June this year was when actually Walter Rodney was assassinated in 1980. And so it's something we need to take note of, among others, like Maurice Bishop, for instance, as well. So we have many great forerunners among our communities who have been among us, and still their spirit live among us. And we need to actually enhance and embrace their knowledge and the education which they set out to lay down for us.
And indeed, because Walter Rodney did so much, his book inspired a lot of people, and you can say probably after his passing, that's when he became well known among, say, the black community.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important, like I said, we embrace and look at our education, which was Walter Rodney was naturally a historian, and you had a few weeks back another prominent great historian on African studies, which came on in Husi on your program. So it seemed that Guyana, among with Grenada, Jamaica, Haiti, and many other places in the Caribbean, played a very important role in trying to enhance our African communities throughout the Caribbean and elsewhere on this planet. So education is very important, and that's what I think we need to actually try to how at least our people get more insight into our history, but also the awareness of our those forerunners and what we can learn from them in order to continue building on those foundations which they already has created and laid down.
Well, we're going to take a music that you chose, African Postman. And when we come back, we've got a series of conversation today. We're going to catch up on a conversation last week with these George Floyd, the protest, and also the state of our mindset. And also, I'm going to pose a question to you, which I'm asking the community. Is Britain a racist country? So, is Britain a racist country? So think about that.
Racist?
Yeah, racist country. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So think about that.
I will hold on to it. And African Postman is in line with what the introduction was about.
Yes.
I know you always like me to explain why I chose certain things.
Sure.
And so I think that title, and when you put it on, speaks for itself in relation to what we just was introducing.
Okay. So you're listening to my special guest here on Feferity Radio. Is a regular now, Kenneth Cuvalay, a social psychiatric nurse, specialized in psychiatric, addiction, and psychoeducation. Also is a key founder and former clinical manager of Mental Health Caribbean. Well, this is this track that he chose, African Postman by Burning Spear.
Your nostalgic music and sound.
African postman. African postman. African postman. Who bring iron, telegram. Telegram was so interesting to high and high as Africans descendants, sons and daughters of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, earth rightful ruler, without any apology, say, this is the time when I should come home, yes, Come on, hold the book. Postman African, Postman African, Postman African, African postman, postman. They bring the telegram. They buy African, African, African. Woyo, 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 ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha, atu 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 atu, ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Yeah. Oh.
African postman. Born in Spare, Winston Rodney. So Kenneth Cuvalay, what a choice there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's an educational choice. It speaks for itself, and I think it's right in line with our introduction a while ago. So it's very important we enlighten and give these type of information, because if you look at people like Burning Spear and so many others, a whole lot of us has been out there setting the foundation and paving the way for us to enhance ourselves as African and have a clear self-determination of what we want to achieve in life. And along the way, a lot of has happened and a lot of steps has been went backward. And I think partly we are also to blame for some of the setbacks as well in different ways. So education is one, but we need to be, like I said last week on the program, we too need to be very critical about our involvement, our way, and the way we attempt to set out and stage our destiny. So that's also a very important element in liberating ourselves and fighting to be self-sustainable in life in general.
Indeed, self-critical analysis is good, because most times we see others more than we see ourselves. So I think it's imperative that we look into ourselves. But coming back, I mean, the question before the African Postman by Born in Spear, I pose it to you: is Britain a racist country? What do you say?
Well, I say, look, racism is a phenomenon, and it is present in the UK or the United Kingdom, whichever way you want to call it. And the extent and the target of racism, racist attitude in the UK have varied over the course of time. You know, the history of racism in the UK is also heavily linked to its relationship with its former colonies and citizens that comprise the British Empire, many of whom settled in the so-called Great Britain, particularly following World War II. So it is also strongly linked to the attitude and the norms of the entrenched British class system. So we need to understand that. And so to answer your question, yes, Britain, like any most part of other parts of Europe, are racist states. The mere fact that they are colonial powers, you cannot be a colonial power and doesn't have a correlation with racism and at times fascism as well. So we need to be very much clear on these things. Most likely places like the UK and the world we are living in today are attempting to some degree to address institutional racism and discrimination, which are some of the elements which represent the legacy of colonialism of itself, you know. So it was only, I think, laws were passed in the 1960s that specifically prohibited segregation, you know. So if you ask me that question, I have to answer it in a broader context, like I just explained. It is a racist country. Is it doing enough to eliminate and eradicate racism like any other European country? I will say no, because it is very much systemic within the system of the legacy, which still represent colonial attitude, colonial approach, colonial activities abroad up until today. If you look at the Commonwealth, for instance, all of the African countries are almost, although they are independent and fought away from Britain, those who were under colonial rule of Britain, are still in many ways under scrutiny of the Commonwealth, which is said to dictate those African countries' self-determination up until today. A very good example of a leader who has been margined to what one attempt to characterize in a very extreme negative sense, who stepped out of the Commonwealth at the time, was our icon, Robert Mugabe, for that matter. So we need to understand that we cannot take it for granted just because, and even today, if you look at how African and other people of non-white communities are treated in Britain, the Netherlands, and other parts of Europe, the legacy still continues in many ways. So yes, my answer, Britain up until today is still a racist country.
I mean, tell us, because you've lived here as well in the United Kingdom, tell us your experience when it comes to racism.
Well, I didn't particularly live in the UK. I visited the UK frequently for almost 40 years and spent lengthy time with our brothers who are struggling to eradicate and actually address the issue of institutional racism and discrimination, whether it's from trade union point of view or from other social levels. You were speaking some weeks ago to a brother, which is his name is Glenroy Watson. For one, I know Glenn for many years now in that struggle, and the struggle still continues today within the underground, the RMT system. So, and my experience is, yes, I had an experience that came from the Netherlands and was actually held with a group of our trade unionists, which were traveling, not on one occasion, many occasions. We were pulled aside and basically were interrogated by customs employees, where I even had to point out that to those employees of customs, some of the question you are posing is as if you are consider us to be a suspect as such, whereof all white people on the same plane coming in from that same flight, they could have just passed and continued their way. So the most humiliating, non-relevant question was actually posed to us as Africans coming into that country. And I don't think it has changed up until today. As a matter of fact, I will take back the word I don't think. It hasn't changed into that capacity. The same thing is with France. I mean, you're coming from Saint Martin, the Dutch part of the Caribbean, through Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport. Many times I've been singled out. Most black Africans or African people were singled out by French authorities with questions as, do you have drugs on you? This, that kind of question, as if you are the embodiment of actually transporting and smuggling drugs. Whereas we know in Europe that
You there?
it is not from petty tail smugglers who attempt to smuggle drugs by coming in on a plane at times.
Sorry, Sir Kenneth, we missed that. You were saying from Europe, and then the phone just went blank. I mean, we missed that part.
From Europe.
Yeah.
I was saying when you are traveling from the Dutch Caribbean, for instance, as well, and coming in by France, the same attitude, the same behavior, the same treatment. French authorities would single out African people and would ask them, do you have drugs with you, etc., etc. Whereof all white people who are coming in on that same flight can pass and continue going on their business as usual.
That's stigmatization, isn't it?
I beg your pardon?
I said that's stigmatization, isn't it? Stereotype.
It is very much stereotyping, stigmatization, along with the humiliating questions you are posed and being addressed with. And so it is not only Britain, it's also throughout other parts of Europe, and it's a systemic method and system. In Amsterdam here, you had the same control which they call zero tolerance. When they single out people to coming from the Caribbean as well, or other parts of Europe coming into Amsterdam with that system, predominantly the people who are singled out were African or people who are non-white people, for that matter. So Europe is a racist continent in general. And the most of these powers, we must remember, were or still to some degree colonial
Feferity
powers.
Radio, your nostalgic music radio, and music radio, and your
French
nostalgic
territory
station.
is supposed to be independent in Africa with their revenues and everything, has to pay France the bigger percentage of their income, gross income, whereof it is their resources, but yet France are collecting the bigger bit and the bigger sum of those
Taxes.
economical generated wealth, yes, among taxes and other things. So we are still in a situation that, and we must understand, when we speak about racism and discrimination, institutional speaking about it, are elements enshrined or embedded within the system as representing the legacy of colonialism of itself.
Right.
Are you still there?
Yeah. I'm here. I'm just taking some notes whilst you're speaking. You know, last
So
week.
I think
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was going to let you go ahead, but I said I think it's very important our African community and our people are educated and understand that the methodology and the models which are still in place to characterize African people of color in and marginalized people of color in many ways are still the same today. It's like I said last week on our program. If a person, a woman, a man, coming from India, and look around you in the UK today, Indian people present themselves in organizational institutions and will be seen with their identity, whether it be clothing or whatsoever. And there is very a little attempt to actually prohibit that. In African situation, it's a struggle, and it would be a contested issue to maintain your identity, whether it's with clothing, your expression, etc., etc. And you don't find Indian people trying to alter their accent, whereof they are hiding, whether or not they come from India. What I'm trying to say here is that we are, as Africans, are in a constant warfare, maintaining or trying to maintain our cultural identity. By the way, like I said previously, the enslavers attempt to commit cultural genocide on African culture in essence. It has failed because we had strong leaders at the time, strong warriors at the time who set out a fight. Wilberforce, like they always speak about, who so-called has played such an important role in freeing our ancestors. Our ancestors fought for their freedom with their blood.
Yeah. So I think that would lead me to the question of phobianism.
About
Phobianism, yeah, or phobia.
Oh yeah,
right,
yeah.
Do you think, as a system, Europe is afraid of African as a system, and because the system is built that way, whereby it's institutional racist, there's institutional racism within the structure, within the system. We've all come to know that. So, as a result of that, do you think that that system that has created whites to be privileged or dominant has created also putting white people in the position of being afraid of a phobia of African people, would you say?
I think when you look at Europe in the whole, from a way back historical background, whether it would be in relation to African or Africa, and I'm going to trash it out a little broader. You look at the Middle East, you look at various other places in the Caribbean as right now, which is playing out Venezuela. European were living in the dark ages, like they call it. I call it the ages where they were not actually, as a people, having any kind of knowledge of civilization. And they had nothing. I mean, even to the Opium War in relation to Marco Polo and Britain. The British went to China not because the Chinese needed anything from Britain. Britain and the rest of Europe always need something from the rest of the world which they doesn't have. I mean, Britain doesn't produce oil. They doesn't produce uranium. They doesn't produce coffee. Europe produce nothing in essence. So yes, they have great reason to be afraid of the rest of the world. And with that anxiety, they created the most destructive weapons and methods to actually dehumanize and actually inflict genocide on other people in order to capture and take what is theirs. And it still continues today. So yes, to answer your question, Europeans are afraid of Africans and they are afraid of the rest of the world, because right now, without the oil, without all the resources, without the sugar cane, I mean, they have nothing, basically speaking, which is fundamentally to sustain them surviving as such. I mean, they may advance themselves and say, well, we have high technology in various areas, but a lot of those technology, if you look back in time, are also inventors of African invention. So, I mean, you know, so Britain and Europe was always a backward place in essence from the beginning of time.
So do you, I mean, would you agree or say that is because of the phobiaism that have caused them to become racist?
Well, over time with the phobia and the maintenance and the, like I said, the extermination, for instance, of the Indians, the indigenous people of the Caribbean, the Arawak and the Caribbean, they exterminate them. And as they exterminate people, and that's why actually with the Opium War at the time with China, the Chinese didn't have the gunpowder. The British had the gunpowder. And so they had an element of a stronger strength or element to defeat easier the people who were fighting against them. And by doing that, over time, they created more horrendous human weapon of mass destruction to form.
Mm-hmm.
And with yeah, I'm here again. And with that form of arrogancy and power, which they maintained by force, by killing, exterminating other peoples on this planet, they created arrogancy of white privilege and based on white supremacy. And that's what is actually still happening today. Even if you look at right now, the George Floyd issue, you're seeing a lot of white people stating, well, you know, the Jews are being discriminated because we have anti-Semitism. And I am, a white lady, I maybe said it last week, but I was speaking to some time ago here in the Netherlands, said, well, I was approached by the police and I've been harassed by the police. So it is only Africans or people of color. The mere fact that that white person failed to understand that that's not structurally from her birth, her life, which she has to go through, and that is for most Africans and people of color, from the day they were born on this planet, that is their life struggle, is an indication which show you how far disconnect of failing to understand as white privileged person what are the differences and why others has to be fighting for what they need to be fighting for. So yes, it is phobia, it is arrogancy, and by maintaining and capturing and colonizing others, exterminating particular race on this planet, continue to create weapon of this mass destruction, where they only now need to sit in some chamber somewhere and set a drone on other people and blow them into pieces. Yes, that arrogancy is there along with the fear, and they will, I think Europe and these colonial powers will continue to create as much defense and weapon in order to maintain that kind of a power struggle and system which they has happened to some degree conquer the world with. So yes, we cannot see, at least I cannot see it differently. And by the way, the reality speaks for itself.
The other day here in the UK, over the weekend, there was a protest in Bristol. I don't know if you've seen that on your TV stations over there. And a statue was pulled down by one of these molesters who adopted human beings and children and all of that. And there are many like him around the country and around Europe. I was going to ask you if you can give us a little bit, and if it's not sufficient enough, I'm gonna play one of your artists that you chose, Big Youth. But I just want to see what you make of the whole incident that happened with the pulling down of the statues.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah, go ahead. When we come back.
Yeah.
We'll
So
gladly answer that question. Yeah.
right. So I'm gonna play Big Youth. It's not the track that you chose, but this one I think it fits in with our conversation. Is Black Man Message.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
So this is Big Youth. My special guest, Kenneth Cuvalay, over there in the Netherlands. We'll see you after the top of the hour, after the break.
I beg your pardon?
went to Africa and you told the Africans that they must all become Christians. Because if they become Christians, when they die, they will go to heaven. Because heaven is a wonderful place. Ladies and gentlemen, if heaven was such a good place, do you think white people will tell black people about it? So we came to England with all the expectations of being equal. Here we are in the mother country. The white man can't come to terms with it. And I'll tell you something, as I've said before. If you English people, not white people, if you're not English, you're welcome to stay in England. If you're English and you don't like the way we are running England, please leave.
A Quill Akwesi Boutique are proud sponsors of Feferity Radio. Akwesi Boutique inspired by 50s and 60s African fashion nostalgia, yet quintessentially British with a London accent, creating custom-made orders for special occasions. Akwesi Boutique create unique hair and clothing accessories that are quirky, classic and stylish for both men and women. Akwesi is a zero-waste design boutique, sourcing distinctive and colourful textiles from remnants, making most of their items one of a kind. You can find Akwesi Boutique on Instagram and Facebook. For more information, email akwesiboutique@gmail.com or visit the website www.akwesiboutique.com.
All day, every day, playing your favorite songs. This is Feferity Radio. Feferity Radio, your nostalgic station.
Well, welcome back to your nostalgic station, Feferity Radio. And my special guest today, as always, here on a Tuesday, Kenneth Cuvalay, a social psychiatric nurse and specialized in psychiatry, education, and addiction and psychoeducation. I've been saying this for so long now. It's like, but yeah, he's on the line, and also is a key founder and a former clinical manager of Mental Health Caribbean. Welcome, sir. Welcome back again.
Yeah, thank you, brother Freestyle. And well, your question a while ago was related to the so-called Edward Colston statue, which was pulled down.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the name of the person is which that statue represents is Edward Colston. Colston, 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 if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right.
Nevertheless,
you're right. We shouldn't be calling the name as frequently.
Yeah, but the name of the person with the statue represents symbolically in relation to British Empire as they didn't have the name Great Britain for nothing. It symbolized how the British went around and treat the rest of the world and pronounce themselves as an empire as such. And so Colston, Edward Colston, is one element. If we speak about the Barclays Bank, for instance, the Bank of the Caribbean and other institutions, the Lloyd Brothers, for instance. The Lloyd Brothers and all of the Barclays family were slave owners for that fact. So, I mean, a lot of the so-called Great Britain system, which they are so proudly speaking about today, maintain and still continue to honor and uphold the legacy of colonialism and enslavement of people. I mean, slavery continues today in other ways. Yeah, there was a time that they will have taken our people in the U.S. and lynched them by the rope. Put a rope and throw it around the branch of a tree and hang you. Today, it seems, and that's not only for the U.S., I think it's Kwesi Linton Johnson's song, sing a song whereof it seemed that police had a license to kill Africans.
Yeah.
And so the whole merit of the legacy of racism throughout Europe continue and has been repositioned after a lot of these African countries has fought for independence. The mere colonial masters has repositioned and reorganized their methods. And so, even to the issue pertaining to George Floyd and a lot of white people who are going down on their knees and in front of black Africans and black people asking for forgiveness. I think we need to be careful with that kind of a melodrama and sentiment, because at the end of the day, Africans are still being killed with the same structures and the same people who work and maintain those structures within the system. So unless white people are willing to give up a lot of their privilege, which they has captured over time from us and our ancestors and other people, this is only a form of playing into sentiment. And even some of them, leaders and politicians, could be standing there and actually putting themselves on the display of the global stage in order to air their own agenda and probably be approached by some big corporation for some kind of a distinguished job in the aftermath of all of these things. So the whole issue about what is going on now, we need to analyze it and carefully make sure we understand what is going on and make sure we understand what white supremacy objective was always about and still is about.
Yeah.
Because, like I said earlier, repositioning your methods and your tactics is something I think we Africans fail over time to do. Marcus Garvey, Steve Biko, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Eldred Cleaver, Carmel Stokely, all of these people who fought for our liberation, at a point in time, they put some of us as window dressing on the screen of movies in some corporation. A lot of us had been bought off as well. And a lot of our constituencies, the broader community, are still living in impoverished situation, and those who were supposed to continue the struggle and the fight, we went and we laid back, or we became corrupted, whereof a lot of those forerunners and the foundation and the road they have paved for us to build and continue on, we were stagnated. So, while at the same time, like I said, white supremacy always reposition their tactics and their approach to maintain and hold on and hold their grip on that power. And we need to be very much be careful of what is going on now and the sentiment which they are posing to bring in front of us, because at the end of the day, with the melodrama, we are still being killed, whether it's in Britain, the Netherlands, the Caribbean, Africa, the US. For our African people, the situation has not fundamentally changed.
Right. Fundamentals. It is very important to look at the fundamentals. And in relation to the statue being pulled down or taken down, and also the protest, what we see, or what we are looking at, what we are seeing is the front runners of the protest, the statues. Talking about our lives, African lives matter. They all been white, at the front line doing all of this. You can say in collaboration or as an effect of what is going on around the world with George Floyd. But there's so many more Georges and Floyds that's been going on. However, though,
that's true.
When you mentioned William Wilberforce, and this is a question I also posed to my guest earlier on, Rosemary Laye, that after slavery was abolished, there was no black faces, as a liberator, people who fought to end the slave trade. It was all white faces. White names that we all know. Even one of the schools in Freetown I attended, one of our schoolhouse was named by all of the abolitionists, William Wilberforce and all of these people. So now we're seeing the same thing repeating itself, where in terms of the glory, ascertain the glory, or taking the glory of our miserable life that we've been experiencing in the hands of the Europeans. Now we're seeing more white people as well kneeling down in front of black people, asking for forgiveness, taking down statues, and all of these things. Do you think it's a coming of the old days where when everything is settled down, we're going to be looking at these white folks as a savior of the sanity world that people are going to be enjoying in the future?
But that's my point with the melodrama and the sentiment, which is could and is in many cases has been misleading, and we tend to fall for these sentiment in many cases, because the mere fact is that all of these white people, whether they are middle class, high class, and possess their wealth and everything, the question we need to ask them in, how much of them are prepared to come and present us with reparation in economical sense and repairment of our community in relation to economics. So it's very easy to go down on your knees, which by the way has not been started by white people, because if you look at the football players in the US who are African, by the way, who has been demonized and been discredited by Trump and others because they went down and failed to salute the flag, all of a sudden this form of attitude has been adopted by white people, and it's all well and done. But my bigger question is, in how far are white communities prepared to address and give up their wealth, a part of that wealth which has been stolen from our ancestors and by the blood of our ancestors, pay with their life? How much of them? Look, let me put it this way: you look at Nazi Germany. For whatsoever reason, which organization with a truck or transport did collaborate to carry or do anything in the direction of Auschwitz, as they call it? Up until today, the Center from Wiesenthal will prosecute you, hunt you down and prosecute you, and demand reparation. The Lloyds Brothers, the Barclays Bank, the institution of whatever of the Caribbean, which is in the UK, somewhere in Liverpool, these big, the institution of the Caribbean, whatever it's called. Can't bring the name on that one correctly right now, but it doesn't matter. How much of these organizations was being forced to go in front of a judge like the Jews do and demand reparation and payment for the crime that has inflicted and on the Jews, and actually the wealth which they generated by actually, committing that crime. How much of
your nostalgic music radio and your nostalgic
people who are owners of those institutions today are prepared to pay us reparation in whichever form? Whereof, when you look at what took place with the Jews, all of the European countries and institutions are prepared to pay reparation when the Center of Wiesenthal hunt them down. So there is a double standard, and there is a different too. We are also very much fragmented as African. The Jews, Israel represent the Jews as a country. Now, when you look at us in the Dutch Caribbean, we fall under the scrutiny of the Dutch. When you look at Africa, there's a lot of involvement of Belgium, France, still in the continent. The continent Africa should be a continent in a collective sense, one nation, one continent, which is a representative of the African people at home and abroad. But in that sense, we are divided. And I think Kwame Nkrumah approached that at that point in time to speak about African Union in a collective sense. It somewhere down the line it didn't work out.
Well,
So we are very much still here today, and the people who enrich themselves, whether it's the Barclays Bank and the Lloyds Brothers and you name it, so many other organizations, and the march right now and the kneeling down, white privilege, in which degree, to what degree they are prepared to pay up what they need to pay.
Well, I mean, what I think about the divided Africans, I think it's been long with, overstretch the narrative to a point where the reality of it doesn't really maximize what we are saying, because I think there are more of us as African people on the planet that are united within our understanding of what is going on and what needs to be done. However, we're not really focusing too well on the fear of African people. I think that's what I think we should be focusing on the phobia aspect. What are you afraid of? I mean, we should open that sort of conversation. Because the reason I said it is that you mentioned about the giving up of their wealth. And to me, that poses a real question. Because if you have a white friend, not any influential person, but a white friend, when it comes to reparation and you're talking about giving up, their wealth, I think that's the time you will know who is really a true friend. What do you say to that?
Well, that's the case, and it's been going on all the time, because that's why we are having a problem even in the structures within the legislation of the European institution when it comes to reparation and the discussion around reparation. It's a big problem, because in that case, when you acknowledge the crime as such, there is an economical value, economical side to it as well. I mean, if you go and you damage somebody's car tomorrow or wherever, you will end up by some judge, in front of some judge or the insurance company, who will demand you actually pay for the damages. That's a common concept. But in this regard, in the mindset of white privileged people, even to the friends which you will just speak about, they does not even see the mere fact that they are privileged and are so privileged that they can go to universities and studies, and how all of this privileged life and institution in their face, that it isn't because of their working and building it. It has been that what has been taken from others in order to how you have this kind of a privilege. And so at the end of the day, with fear among our own people is a factor which is importantly need to be addressed. And the struggle which we think one gonna give us back or pay us what we need, or how our communities repair is gonna come voluntarily, I think that is a very much grave illusion. So we gotta understand there has to be more sacrifice and collective organizing, collective cooperation, collective working together, and collective understanding who we are as one, as a people. Because our weaknesses are mainly based on the fact that we are so divided among each other as well. And you can say what you want about any other race. I said that previously on this program. Whether it's the Jews, all of them know what their bigger vision of interest is about. And sure, they have differences. In Iran, the Western world can look at Iran and say, well, we don't want them to have this, we don't want them to have weapon of mass destruction. You know, so there's this notion of terrorism in the sense of technology, because what the West is really doing is inflicting terrorism in relation to technology by retaining it as much as possible among themselves. I mean, where do you get off that you are the only people could represent technology and weapon of mass destruction because you are such not the evil people, like they will call other states rogue states, so we cannot permit rogue states to possess weapon of mass destruction. Well, the same people who are saying other states are rogue states, they're the one who use and throw the atomic bomb on the planet, on the human race in the first place. So we need to ask ourselves, who are the rogue states and who are the people who pretend to actually play into sentiment, ask for forgiveness, but at the same time, when you're asking for forgiveness, are you prepared to pay for the damages at the same time?
Well, I mean, that's the question. I mean, also, like I said, we've exacerbated the notion of the division that exists. And I think when you talked about Iran and the Jews and all these people, I think we also have to look at the division among us probably or might be caused by infiltrators. So we've seen that throughout the time, you know, organizations like the Marcus Garvey, like the Martin Luther King, and all of these movements, the Black Panther, you know, we've seen how they've infiltrated those organizations. So when we talk of division, I think we have to be very careful because we've exhausted it so much that it's affecting people who really care. Because it's like we're trying to generalize every African as so divided, and that's not the case. And I think is a view that we hold mostly in the diaspora.
Not necessarily, and I have to point out to you, and I don't want to generalize because there's a lot. Like I started out calling forerunners as Walter Rodney, Marcus Garvey, etc., etc. But at the same time, even Walter Rodney stated in his book at the time, with a question, how Africa underdeveloped Africa as well, and he clearly stated, African, especially after political independence, have contributed to the underdevelopment of Africa as well. In collaboration, as slavery, colonialism, imperialism contributed to the underdevelopment of Africa in the past, and neocolonialism and neoliberalism is contributing at the present, along with some Africans, to underdeveloped Africa. We cannot deny that we have corrupt leaders as well, which are selling out their continent to the same colonial masters. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the poor people who are struggling out there every day to maintain and give food and put food on the tables to stay alive with the kid. I'm not talking about the people who are being abused by puppets within this chain and the hierarchy of powers within these new complicated form of neoliberalism, etc., along with some leaders. We have to address these things as well. And that's what I'm mainly talking about. And it's important we have good leaders as well who try and work hard to protect their wealth, their people, and the interests of their people for long-term future basis. So these are very important things. We have to be critical about our actions at time as well. And I'm not trying to generalize. I'm saying at time, after, and especially after political independence, if you look at how a lot of our African different various regions conducted and collaborate with the Western powers, with corruption and selling out. But look at the Chinese involvement. Some of us right now as African in the UK and other part of the world tend to say, well, you know, the Chinese has a different approach and they mean it well with Africa. I don't think the Chinese mean it well with Africa. The Chinese have a different approach. But at the end of the day, if you look at the Chinese method against their own people, why should the Chinese be prepared to treat the African people any better when they consolidate their power in that continent? That's a simple question we need to ask ourselves. Why would the Chinese treat us any better than the way they are treating the people in Taiwan, Hong Kong, or within mainland China for that matter?
I mean, also, you know, there are lots of people for many years who have been dealing with the Chinese. There are individuals, Africans, black people around the world who are dealing in businesses with the Chinese, going into China to buy and sell and import and all of that. So their story might be completely different looking at the economical position in which they hold with China. And in relation to the leaders that we have in Africa, I think a lot of the time we're not talking to them, we're talking about them. Because it's for us here in the diaspora, when they come over here to be at the necessary meeting, conferences, to pose those questions, for them to understand that things are changing, and they're not changing over there as much, but they're changing from here in the diaspora, and we know exactly what's going on. But we're not making our voices heard, but what we're doing, we're generalizing the divide as to do with, like, is a kind of a generic and sort of like universally the case, and that's not the case. I think we need to be focusing also why our European people are afraid of us. You know, we need to look at that, because I mean, we as African people, I think we are afraid, or black people are afraid of the systems being in place that discriminate against our education, our ideas, our intelligence, and our productivity, right? So we need to be asking question, why is it the case, and not be looking at questions that will make us feel so much down that we don't want to get up and do anything because of the other side may think, or because we're so weak, we're so powerless, or we're so divided.
Well, like I said, and I continue to state that, get up and stand up. I think Bob Marley sang that song as well, and he didn't sing that song for nothing. Even we in the diaspora are at time in a very sort of a privileged situation, like you said. We can talk about it, generalize the talk, but we need to be more effectively, as well as, like you said, when these leaders come, what we are doing about it, how we are going about it, etc., etc. Now, coming back to the question of why European and former European colonial state are so afraid of African, like I said earlier, my personal opinion, I think European who came out of nothing are afraid of all the rest of the world who has everything which they don't have. The European
radio, nostalgic music,
maximum level with what they will call technology, but at the end of the day, the fundamental resources to keep one afloat and give you lifeline, oil and other things. Europe doesn't possess those things, so somehow they are afraid to lose what they has been taken for centuries from others by force. And I think, in my view, that is the bigger anxiety when it comes to this form of phobia in the mindset of white people, because when at the end of the day, when all of that has been taken back or been taken from you, what would you be actually having? Your technology? Well, yeah. Could you throw an atomic bomb and destroy the whole world? Probably yes. But at the end of the day, you don't produce the lifeline, most fundamental resources which continue having the world float on. And all of what they have, whether it's oil. In the Netherlands, you have Shell oil. It's called Dutch Kingdom Shell oil. I mean, let's get real. The Netherlands doesn't produce oil, and how the hell it is Dutch Royal oil? It's oil from Nigeria, and it's been taken and been maintained, and how it's in the hands of colonial power and influences in Nigeria. Like I said earlier, Ken Savaviva was one of the upstanding Nigerian fighters to retain their resources. He was killed. And like I said, we tend to, and that's why I said a while ago, I'm not basically generalizing our responsibility as in the narrative as such. I'm saying we need to reflect on our own action very seriously as well, because our forerunners has invested their life in order to maintain and carry out a struggle to possess and take back what is theirs. The Western world, in Nigeria, in the Ogoni region, people are dying for hunger. And yet, Nigeria is one of the richest part of Africa with oil. And it's all in the name of other nations throughout the Western world. So something is wrong with that picture and that narrative. And how that comes about is partly to blame, like I said, on some of our corrupt leaders, which we are not focusing and demanding enough accountabilities from. But at the same time, the continuation of neoliberalism, neocolonialism, etc., continue.
Yeah.
So, colonialism has changed in many ways, in different forms, and it continues.
Okay, that's the voice there.
For instance, when we started out this question, racism is the UK a racist country? There was a study sometime was done between 2004 and 2014 and 15. That study claimed that racism in the UK is on the rise, with more than 1/3 of those polled admitting that they are racially prejudiced. Racism has been observed and having a correlation between negative factors such as unemployment and foreigners. Brexit, for one, has increased racism, a racist incident where locals became hostile to foreigners or perceived foreigners as negative.
Okay,
so,
we've got a text here. Let me read it out to you from Leon. Thank you very much, Leon. It says, never trust the Europeans' agenda on marches. The goal is always dark and sinister. It's a shame for our people not to too blind to see it. And it says, taking a knee is a ritualistic act performed by Freemasons as a sign of submission to the barometer, and to the world it means something else, but to the elite globalists who run the world, well, our PM is letting them know he is on board with them and their NWO agenda. What do you make of that?
Well, I have to commend Leon very much, because he's been following the core content of this dialogue. I said it earlier. It's a form of attitude and display with this is a cynical way of going about things, which actually I tend to say one should be ashamed of, because there's no truth behind of these theatrical submitting themselves on the knees and begging as if they want to cry, to play into the psychological, emotional senses of African to forgive them. Forgive them for what? The actions are still going on. And so Leon truthfully said, these attitude and presentation in attitude on a theatrical form of display cannot be trusted because, by the way, they are not new. They have been carried out in many ways. It's the same thing has been done in South Africa with the how you call the council for council? How you call that word again?
Reconciliation.
Thank you very much. I mean, reconciliation has taken place, but at the same time, when you look at the economical power structure, who still maintain the economical power versus political power in Africa? Political power is dialogue, speeches in the real basis of power and foundation of power are still maintained by white people with their institution, DuPont, the diamonds producing factories, and you name it. So
Okay.
there's political power and there's economical power. Is a big difference. And so,
Fantastic.
like I said, I beg your pardon?
No, I thought you've learned it.
Oh, but you're hearing me, right?
No. Yeah, no, I thought you've finished that. Sentence you were having. That's all.
Yeah, well, like I said, I have to commend Leon and other people like Leon who are there listening, who I would invite to come out and view and voice and air their opinion, because we need proactive participation in the dialogue.
Yeah.
And I learned from the feedback and the comment from people like Leon and others. And Leon is right on the dot with his analysis. And it is something we need to take very seriously into consideration.
Okay, so if you want to participate and call in and to ask our brother Kenneth a question, you can do that on +44 730 541 7668. Also, we encourage you to leave comments on the page whilst you're listening. If anything that you hear that you feel like you want to comment on, please do that. You can call us and text us as well on the line. Well, so Kenneth, this is not your choice, but this is mine. Linton Kwesi Johnson. So I selected a track called Two Sides of Silence.
Okay, good. Well, Kwesi is always good.
Let's take a listen and we'll come back on the other line.
For the earth's
Right, okay.
hard and thankless toil, silence has no meaning. There is never a feeling of tranquility or mere quietness, never a moment of soundless calm from within or without our troubled selves. How can the clamor of sounds be stilled? There is no void where noises can collect and be made mute before the ring escapes. How indeed can there be a silence when our hearts beat out a sonorous beat, meeting the beating drums of an African past, when our eyes shed solid tears of iron blood that falls on concrete ground. Inside our ears are the many wailing cries of misery. Inside our bodies, the internal bleeding of stifled volcanoes. Inside our heads, erupting thoughts of rebellion. How can there be calm when the storm is yet to come? This unending silence, thought impervious, unbending, not lending an ear to the most delicate of sounds, awaits the blast of bombs which man will explode to break this silent bound, to determine their fate, to be used to create hills of soft obedience where sweet close sounds can rebound and their echoes glide like a carefree bird in rhythmic calm through a mellow, pure, silent space.
Fantastic, amazing poem there by the great man a great poet. Linton Kwesi Johnson. Welcome back, Sir Kenneth. Can you hear us? No, we hold on a minute. Let's do this. Yes, Sir Kenneth, welcome back.
Okay, thank you. I just want to actually, we speak about lynch, right? And I started out earlier in the program by reiterating that previously in the U.S. and other parts of the world, our people used to be lynched. Throw the rope up around the tree, put it around your neck, and you're they hang you, they kill you. The verb of itself, lynch, is attributed to the action of Charles Lynch, an 18th century Virginia Quaker. Lynch other military officers and justices of the peace rounded up Tory sympathizers who were given a summary of trial at an informal court, sentences which were handed down, including whipping, property seizure, core pledge of allegiance, and conscription into the military. Originally, the term referred to the extrajudicial, organized but unauthorized punishment of criminals. It later evolved to describe executions which were committed outside ordinary justice. It is highly associated with white suppression of African America in the South and period of weak or non-existent police authority, as in certain frontier areas of Old West. Now, if you look at the strength of police and authority nowadays, like I said earlier, the lynching ceased to exist in that old form and traditional form. But it has a deep, long-rooted tradition into the U.S., in the South, particularly speaking in the South. But today, if you look at police institutions and legislation, how African people are being treated and are being abused, are being murdered, it's something which is systemic over time, whereof the old-fashioned form of lynching disappeared, and it's as if police have nowadays license to kill us. So, we need to do thorough analysis of how, again, I said earlier, how white supremacy of suppression of white suppression of people reposition their tactics and the methods. And we are confronted and we are sitting in these situations today in tragic ways, and it continues.
Okay.
And like I said, the listeners out there are listening, and I'm sure a lot of them are very much clear, like Leon, who called in, and understand these things. We cannot just trust and give in to the sentiment and the kneeling down, which also, like you said, is a traditional rooted in the Freemason and their tradition and the association of skulls and you name it.
Okay.
So
well, let me read you another text here, because there's one from Paola. There's two texts
your nostalgic music radio, and your nostalgic
between
station.
me and Rosemary Lai. And there was mentioning about Gandhi, the statue of Gandhi be taken down in Ghana. I'm going to read that for you, and then I'll come down to what she says about what you said. All right?
Yeah, go ahead.
The first one, which was like relating to the conversation earlier on with Rosemary Lai, it says, didn't know Gandhi was racist. So people, it found an article of an Italian newspaper. So Google it, found an article on Italian newspaper. Apparently, not only he was racist, but also a sexual pervert, fanatic and self-absorbed bisexual. Oh dear. And this one is for you. He says, although I agree with your guest about being wary of the drama of taking the knee, Leon is very negative and critical. Surely, amongst the people who took the knee, there are also genuine white people?
Well, I think Leon is trying to nuance the issue of the taking of the knee and basically carrying the suspicion and the distrust of white privilege throughout the Western world. And I do agree, and I reiterate, I agree with Leon. We need to look at what Leon attempt to address from a broader nuance, in which actually does not say concentrate or fixate on this particular moment in time. If you go back into history and you study the behavior of general white people in general, by the way, I can turn that question around. If the majority of white people in their societies are so genuine, why are they not prepared to give up or to readdress their position in sharing the wealth so that exploitation of others could be actually eliminated? The mere fact that they are privileged is because of systematical exploitation of others, which they embrace within their schools, within their privileged social systems, etc., etc. So I think one need to understand what Leon was trying to explain to in essence has to do with a bigger explanation and analysis and nuances to the issues.
All right, yes, because I think sometimes, you know, when we talk deeply, I can understand Paola, because she's an Italian. She's coming from that point, and it's true. I mean, to look at the Europeans who are doing this, taking the knee, but also we have to pay attention to the American footballer, is it Rodney, who when he took the knee, nobody was watching, nobody recognized that. So we have to pay mind to that as well, right? So that's what I'm saying there. But coming back, I mean, so because we haven't got much time now. We have about say 7 minutes in conversation.
Okay.
In all of these, the protest, the taking down of statues, the realization of racism being so much, coming like a disease now, a virus, and the attempt to curtail it and to voice it out. What do you think the state of our mindset at this moment? Because we have to juggle and deal with a lot of stuff. We've got the COVID. We've got rules that have been coming in when we get back to normality in terms of transportation, in terms of work, how we're going to be relating to one another, how we, how things going to shape things, our lives. What would be the state of our mind, or what can we be preparing for? What should be in the state of our mind now? What should we be preparing for when we face the world?
Yes, we can really say we as African.
Well, this situation here is affecting everybody, so if you can speak on behalf of, that would be great.
Well, yeah, everybody, yes. I think we need to be prepared to understand that the situation, COVID and everything else which is happening right now, it has a tremendous impact on the psychological and emotional functioning of people's mindset. And I think one of the things which is under address at this point in time is the psychological distress from all what is going on, how that's going to affect people in general. I think, as you so-called go back to normality, which I think normality is something we gotta yet wait and see, which I think gonna take a long time, if ever anything go back to previous form of normality. That's another question. So I think what we need to be looking at is how people gonna be reacting as we gradually go back to some form of normality, psychologically speaking, being not having a job, psychologically speaking, those who can still have a job may be able to work from home, etc., etc. Bankrupt or institution or organization. So I think unemployment and poverty and the level of the disparity, which was what was happening before with people, that's going to be even more graver. So I think we need to be prepared how people are going to be manifesting their reaction at that point in time, and it's going to be a huge challenge in that capacity. So I think that we need to be very much aware of how that people are going to be manifesting mentally.
I mean, also, do you think that the new division of, I wouldn't call it racism, but prejudice, will be on the mask? Who wears a mask and who don't? Do you think that's going to be the new form of discrimination?
Well, it's happening already, and to some degree.
In public transport, for example, I mean, here, if you go into public transport, then it is imperative that you wear the mask. But I'm not saying that don't wear the mask in public transport. But as time proceeds, and then if the mask becomes something of a norm, do you think by some people not wanting to wear it, that's going to be the new form of discrimination?
It's going to be not only the new form of discrimination, it's going to be a new form of, by the way, which is happening already, victimization as well, because it's been taking place in the U.S. for since this is going on. You have people who have been abused by police for not wearing the mask, and you have people who are actually at times not wearing a mask and not being abused at the same time. And there's a lot of discrepancy with where you should wear a mask and who should be wearing a mask at times. So there's a lot of conflicting discrepancy in this developing situation. So to answer your question, discriminate. It's been up until now, I don't know for the UK, but I've been observing, and these have been discussion going on deeply in the US already, where especially Africans have been victimized in this case.
Okay, wow. So Kenneth Cuvalay, I want to say thank you very much for coming in today to make it another interesting and educational, inspiring show. And I didn't even ask you how are you and how's your family. Are they all right?
Well, my family and me, I'm doing good, and I know although that because of the pressure with time, it is not always the wording to ask. It is the sense of spiritualism which you're sharing with each other. Ask that question already, so I felt that was in the the transfer of our connecting with spiritualism. That question has been asked in that fashion, but nevertheless, verbally that you mention it is also welcome. I thank you for that as well. And as well, I would like to thank all of the listeners out there and those who participated for their time and energy and effort to contribute together with us. Yeah. And I would like to wish you a pleasant evening, get some rest as well. I mean, like they say, the pot is telling the kettle to get some rest. I need to get some rest myself. But we need, okay. But have a pleasant evening, and thank you for having us with our togetherness. Make this educational and inspirational moment for our audience around the world, including the UK.
Indeed, and I'm gonna send you out with one of your selection of Burning Spear, Peep.